Welcome back to Cinema Showcase, where movies get their spotlight, a deep dive into movies that we either have forgotten about or personal favorites. And it is the first recording of 2025 of the 2V just umbrella. Sitting with us today, we have a special guest. We have Editing with Ego. You probably know him with just teaching you the tips and tricks on how to make good stuff. Chris, how you doing, man?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing great. 2025 has been a crazy year so far. I mean, we're 2 weeks in, and I've gone to a couple screenings. Feels good. Feels nice to kind of hop back into content creation.
Yeah. Glad to have you back on that content creation. I've been kind of missing your videos. I do like it. And you did see a screening of Wolfman, which overall, I know you probably have the embargo still on, but like if you can give it
hmm
1 out of 10, because that's the first movie I'm gonna go see in 2025.
Honestly, Wolfman was fantastic. I would give it like a 8 out of 10. The only reason I'm scoring it that low and not like a 9 or a 10 out of 10 is because I feel like there's going to be a little bit more to it. Lee Winnell, if you're not familiar, he was originally an actor in the Saw franchise. He was in the first Saw movie. But he's also directed some of the other monster Universal movies like Invisible Man. And he also directed Upgrade, which was a fantastic movie. But Wolfman is one that he has written and directed. And if you know anything about hitting the writing board and really telling a good story, it's that when you're reimagining something that has a cult following, that has a lot of cinematic history. It's really difficult to push aside some of that stigma and come forward with some original ideas, right? So the fact that he was even capable of creating a compelling story. I'm not giving too much away by saying this, but it's a story about family. It's a story about protection, a story about battling generational trauma. And the Wolfman as a monster is almost like this this ultimate beast, right?
Mhm.
That they have to overcome, and it was fantastic. But you definitely watch it in theaters January 17th, I
Yeah,
believe.
yeah.
The embargo list on the 15th, so I'll be able to get my
Okay,
full spoiler full review by then.
great, awesome. I'm super looking forward to it because I think the Wolfman looks great. I love the idea that he was taking for this, like you said, cult classic. But honestly, we can go on for Wolfman. I think today we just go into the Pagemaster, which was your pick.
Let's do it.
I
Let's do it.
think first off, I have heard of this movie like through the grapevine of conversation of like Macaulay Culkin or Christopher Lloyd, but I never actually watched it. And I saw a poster for it like X amount of years ago, and I thought it was a Disney movie, like the ones they kind of just
Mhm.
let fly, but it's a 20th century. And it's on the same like cusp of it. And I think
Yes. So
it's cool.
yeah, no, it's a phenomenal movie. So let me give you a little bit of anecdotal
Yeah.
history here. When I was a kid, all I did was watch VHS movies. We had a little box T. I lived in a homeless shelter, so we didn't have a lot, but we had a little box TV and we had a little VHS player, and we'd go to garage sales, rent movies from libraries, and all this other stuff. And we found this one VHS tape in the old school plastic covers that those Disney movies came in around the time,
Yeah.
and it was the Pagemaster, and it was, the cover looked something out of like the Sword and the Stone, like the old cartoon depictions. And I saw that it had Macaulay Culkin, and even as a kid, I was a fan of Home Alone. I think every kid was, right?
Yeah.
So I popped it in. I'm like, I've seen this guy before, and it was a phenomenal story. It's very akin to like early DreamWorks and early Disney, how like the animation styles kind of diverged. DreamWorks went straight into CG, and Pixar went straight into CG, battling CG, and then Disney kind of doubled down on traditional animation. So to see a live action film transfer into animation as a kid, like that was crazy. I thought I was watching something straight out of Fantasia, or Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So no, it's a phenomenal movie. I can't wait to get into this.
Yeah, no, because with every single pick that we have of this of cinema showcase, with either a guest or just ourselves, we always have some kind of like emotional connection to these movies, or it's just a movie we genuinely can't get enough of. Like One of them was Cloverfield.
Hmm.
Cloverfield, it's the king of found footage movies. It's one of Colin's favorites. But with this one, I was very curious, and when you were saying it's a transition of like live action to animation, very similar to Roger Rabbit, but it was, I think, like better in cases because it really
Hmm.
showcased why 2D animation is so vital to art just as a whole. Like I feel like everyone's really moved on from 2D, and I think
Oh yeah.
remembering why it's really good is vitally important. And to kind of give a description of the movie, it's just simple as this. So it's a story about Richie, played by Macaulay Culkin. Is a boy
Mhm.
who's constantly scared and aware of the dangers of everyday life. Like I love in his bedroom, he had the earthquake kit, like those emergency kits under his bed, and the lights and the
Yeah.
different dangers of things. Like in case of fire, break this, and in case of glass, he has the boots.
Mhm.
It's classic. But when he's sent on an errand and caught in a storm, he waits it out in a local library where he meets the librarian, Mr. Dewey, who's played by Christopher Lloyd. And when I was doing research on this movie, I found out that they named him Dewey based on the Dewey Decimal System, which is like the old
Yep.
classic way of keeping track of books. And I thought that was genius. When looking for a phone call home, Richie gets transported into a world of pure fantasy. Like we were saying, it's a combination of 2D animation with some CG monsters. And throughout this journey of imagination and fantasy, he leads into the guardian of this world, the Pagemaster, which
Hmm.
I think the Pagemaster is really funny because you were saying it looks kind of like Sword in the Stone and the Black Cauldron kind of
Exactly.
things, and he looks almost exactly like Merlin from those
I
movies.
think they modeled him after, or like his character design was very modeled after like Merlin
Yeah.
and Gandalf from like
Yes.
the Lord of the Rings animated trilogies and
Yeah.
stuff. And honestly, I think I mean, just talking about the actors for a second here,
Yeah.
Christopher Lloyd as
Gosh.
a voice actor, you wouldn't think, right?
No.
But he was phenomenal in this movie. He had the gruffness and like the antiquity, right? That the page master was supposed to represent,
Yeah.
this guardian of books, this guardian of literature. And then, alongside Macaulay Culkin, who at the time, uh, as a child actor, right? There's a lot of stuff that happened to Macaulay, to Kamoli,
All good. We know the guy.
Macaulay
The kid
to
from Home Alone.
Macaulay,
Yeah.
the kid from Home Alone. There was a lot of stuff happening around the time as a child actor, right? I think one of the last films that he ever did was Richie Rich, but
Oh
The
my
Page
God.
Master, yeah,
That was
one of
his
the
last
last
one?
films. One of the last films was
Wow.
Richie Rich. I'm pretty sure that was when he was older. That was when he was sort of transitioning out of child acting. That was at the
Wow.
cusp of like his dad having
Mm.
all this control and going through the
Yeah.
divorce with his mom and everything. And kind of like now knowing that history and realizing that The Page Master was probably one of the last films he ever did as a child actor, kind of gives it a little bit more nuance,
Mm.
right? So he's playing this kid who is afraid of everything.
Mm.
And at the time, as a kid, Culkin didn't think he had control of anything in his life, right? So
Mm.
there's like this layer of depth that goes into that kind of character development. And then on top of all of that, him being able to portray something that was a little bit out of his ballpark. Up until then, he played very confident child characters, right? Very confident, but they kind of knew what they were doing, or at the very least, they had like this bravado.
Mm.
Again, his most famous being Kevin McAllister in Home Alone. But this transition where you got to see this star child actor play like this scared little kid,
Mm.
um, who was afraid of trying out anything new, like that was very relatable, as a child, kind of like being afraid of things or being afraid of everything, not knowing what's happening next.
Yeah.
That drew me in. And then the second everything transitions over into glorious Technicolor. I think that was one of
Oh,
the biggest things
yeah.
about the animation was that people stray away from 2D animation nowadays, but at the time there was this transition between 2D animation and just like trying to figure stuff out.
Mm.
They tried Technicolor. They tried elements of 3D or early CG. They tried puppeteering, like in Roger Rabbit.
Mm.
They tried all these different things in the span of like 20 years in animation, that the Page Master as a movie that's kind of like lost in time stands as one of probably the best examples of that transition into this new age of animation.
Yeah. That's a really well put. Lost to time because when I was kind of looking up stuff for this thing, there was not a lot of information that was like I had to like go to like the third or fourth page of Google because I feel like a lot of people are pushing this away for some reason, having it be like lost of time when the whole movie itself took 3.5 years to make because 2D
Yep.
animation at the time was like all hand drawn or just retracing with those like the little flaps that they had, and I think it is a testament to time on art because I think Macaulay Culkin playing this character and like you said he has a bravado where when he is the animated character also is drawn almost to look exactly like Macaulay Culkin too. So you can see the transition of him acting and with his expressions on live action in this. It's seamless, and I think it's absolutely beautiful. And as the movie progresses, we get the three tests that we have. We have horror, adventure, and fantasy, played by I can't remember the horror guy for some reason. I think it's like Mark. I think I wrote here. Frank Welker, who plays horror. Then we have adventure
Yeah.
played by the great Patrick Stewart. Then we have fantasy
Hmm.
played by Whoopi Goldberg. Three
Yep.
people I genuinely would not have ever guessed
You wouldn't think, right?
is
You
in the
wouldn't
same
think.
cast. And I think it was Patrick Stewart's and Whoopi Goldberg's like first voiceover role because this was
It
in
was.
'94.
So upon like rewatching it and doing more research into it, because again, a childhood favorite movie of mine. But at the time, I think I had only ever, as a child, only seen Whoopi Goldberg act in like Sister Act
Mm-hmm.
and in a few, other choice movies and TV shows. Now she's known for so many things, right? But at the time, hearing Whoopi's voice was like as a cartoon character, you wouldn't think that she would have like the voice acting chops because I mean most voice actors around that time kind of just use their iconic voices anyway.
Yeah.
But it made the character of fantasy not just more humorous, but I guess more like nurturing.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about Whoopi Goldberg's voice, but she kind of has like that motherly or like that auntie tone, you know.
Yes.
And Patrick Stewart
Oh,
being a voice actor as well. I mean, that's not uncommon. He's got like an iconic voice, but you wouldn't think Christopher Lloyd, Whoopi
mm,
Goldberg, Patrick Stewart, Macaulay Culkin, all in the same movie,
yeah.
and no one talks about this movie.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a
No one
huge
ever talks
star.
about it.
It's a star-studded cast for multiple reasons,
Mhm.
and I didn't. Like, it took me like halfway through the movie to like get an idea that maybe it was Patrick Stewart because he's doing that pirate accent the whole
Exactly.
time. It's like
Hmm.
45 minutes you're spending with his character, and like 20 minutes, and I'm like, is that Patrick Stewart? Like I couldn't tell, and I think it's really fun. And as you were saying, there's some actors or voice actors at the time were using their iconic voice. Jim Cummings, who is famous for Winnie the Pooh, Tigger,
Hmm.
all these different amazing characters. He played Long John Silver in this movie when they were in the fantasy section, and I think
Hmm.
it's like an icon that you can quickly grab. But then Patrick Stewart playing Adventure was just so it was just so fun. It was so great.
And now that we're kind of like delving into the different
Yeah,
areas
yeah.
of the movie and everything, I just want to comment at how like as an avid reader,
Mm.
I don't read much now. I think that's one of the biggest epidemics ever at this point is that there's a lot of people out there that used to read a ton who are now in like their mid late 20s who don't read at all. As a kid, I used to read all the time.
Yeah.
So when I watched this movie and I saw them talk about Moby Dick,
Hmm.
I saw them talk about the Hounds of Baskerville,
Yes.
Long John Silver from Treasure Island, like all these iconic stories,
Hmm.
and you get to see them come alive. The
Hmm.
character designs, the voice acting, the thematic elements throughout.
Yeah.
As a child reader, that was fascinating to me
Mm.
because up until that point, most of everything that I read was just up here,
Mm.
right? You leave it to your imagination. But the animators really did a number on me with this movie because they went. It almost seems like above and beyond to
Yeah.
to make it as real and as involved as possible. The
Yeah.
the the crashing waves, right, of on the bookshelves in the opening scene. They painstakingly went scene by scene, making all the little froth elements and everything. There was so much about this film as a kid that was just fascinating.
Hmm.
And then as an adult, rewatching it and then going through and seeing all this cool stuff that they did behind the scenes and how they were able to create the movie and try out new stuff that hadn't been done before.
Hmm.
That just kind of adds to the mystique of the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think you made a really good point when you were talking about the different books in there, because there's like I think 15 stories referenced in this movie. Like
15
there's
stories
even
reference.
poems. There was like the Raven from
Mm-hmm.
Edgar Allan Poe,
Nevermore.
Nevermore, and it was just it was also really cool about it is that each section, the horror, the fantasy and adventure, in there like within 10 minutes has like 13 different scores. Like in when you
Mm-hmm.
said the crashing of the waves, there's that score, and then when they're on the island looking for the treasure with Long John Silver, there's that, and then the my favorite part was the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde part when they're in the horror
Yes.
and they're walking through the potions and horror when he walks by it becomes human, which was I think
Mm-hmm.
super fun and clever. And then we actually meet Jekyll and Hyde, and it was just a really cool way to kind of like strike some like child fear, like I would say child fear, like because Disney used to like
Yeah.
traumatize us. So I think it's
Oh, for sure.
yeah, I think it's super cool how they kind of like made each section of the movie, although it'd be really quick. It was like 10 minutes per section maybe because it was like an
Mm-hmm.
hour and a half movie. I kind of wanted more time with these areas. I wanted to like feel scared or adventurous and all these other different things.
So I think that's part of like the um the childhood wonder of it
Mm-hmm.
all, right? So it's really fun looking back at it, like watching it. I remember the first time I ever watched it, and I remember getting to the horror section and actually being scared at that part. Like
I
there was
bet.
something like and it's not like like the gory horror or anything like that. It's
Yeah,
like that bone chilling
yeah,
goosebumps feel,
yeah.
And as a kid back then, it was like seeing something that I wasn't supposed to see, or seeing something that I hadn't imagined prior because it was too scary to imagine,
Hmm.
and then being able to appreciate sort of the because for all intents and purposes, a lot of the stories referenced in this movie aren't necessarily for children.
Hmm.
A lot of the stories that are
Oh
referenced
yeah.
are higher levels of critical thinking, higher levels of processing and literature. So you're thinking like middle school, high school level type stuff.
Hmm.
But the way that they portrayed everything to have or to portray the elements of fantasy and wonder, or the elements of adventure, or the elements of horror and fear and stuff, and be able to translate these bigger pieces of literature into something that was palatable for kids, between the ages of 7 and 12,
Hmm.
is a testament to the attention of detail that they try to put into every element of this movie. But all of that, on top of all of that, uh, traversing each area with the main character, experiencing what he's experiencing, going through his trials,
Hmm.
as it were. It made you the whole movie made you feel like a part of the mission,
Yeah.
and I think that's what's missing in a lot of uh, current like children animation stuff. Again, for a different audience, of
Sure.
course, but there was always like these elements of like bringing kids along with the story that happened between the 80s and early 2000s that I think is missing now.
Yeah, and as a movie that's 30 years old, I mean, because it was released November 23rd of 94, and
Hmm.
surprisingly, it was made for $27 million. You can
Yes.
see that in that money. But the sad thing is though, it didn't make its money like at all.
Mm-mm.
It was made the total was 13.5 million. And I feel like 30 years later, it may have a cult following because as things were put on streaming and were more, I guess, like put away safely through the digital aspect of these things because
Hmm.
it's on streaming platforms. You can get it. You don't have to worry about hunting down for the DVD sleeves or the VHS stuff. I think it's great that people can actually go back to it because there's a lot of this movie that is really cool. And as you said, as we go through the trials with Richie at the end of the movie where he's riding his bike back home and gets out of the books, he takes that that leap literally over
Hmm.
the random like
Or the ramp.
construction site with the
Yeah.
ramp and takes like that 6 feet dive. I thought that was great, but at the same time, I was thinking like, who just leaves these like 8 foot like these things were like made for like construction sites for like when you're building a
Mhm.
home. But yeah, sure, it's the '90s. Kids can play over these kind of things. There was no parents watching, and I think it was a fun way to kind of like show that this character has changed. And he sleeps in the treehouse at the end of the movie that he was too scared to go in because of
Mhm.
heights and ladders and all these other different things. And it was a great movie all the way through.
All the way through. So like when you initially reached out to me and you're talking about like movies lost in time
Mhm.
or um I initially had two movies come straight to mind. It was Dogma by Kevin Smith
So vast
and
different choices. It was either Dogma, which is
vastly different
like one of
choices
the most
too.
controversial movies he's ever made, just made period,
Hmm.
and then a beautiful story about a kid bravery. It's like
Exactly.
I was
I thought
laughing
that
at the
was
choices. It was
funny.
great.
But those are the two that came to mind because just not even really touching on Dogma, but these
Yeah.
these are movies that at the time didn't even do well,
No.
right? So you're talking about box office and overall revenue. Pagemaster didn't even break even.
Mm,
It did worse than breaking even. It basically bombed,
yeah.
and I think that it's one of those passion projects, right? That every creator wished they had. I would see this as a passion project for any animator that wanted to get into the game. It's during a height where you're working with one of the biggest child actors
Yeah.
ever,
Mm,
right? Macaulay Culkin was everywhere,
mm,
right? You're getting to work with one of the biggest talents possible during the time, and you're getting to work with one of the biggest production companies that were busting out movies at the time,
yeah.
and you're directly challenging everything that Disney is putting out, which in the '90s
That was
Disney was
rough.
still big.
Yeah.
That's rough. That's a
That's
rough challenge to
rough.
hit.
Yeah.
So the fact that they even made as much money as they did
Hmm.
is phenomenal. But I think what makes this a movie lost in time and a cult classic, right? It's definitely got a following.
Yeah.
It's the fact that I think it came at a time where, um, like I said, production companies were trying out different things, animation studios were trying out different things, but it came at a time where story was at its peak,
Hmm.
right?
Oh
So
yeah.
you're talking about a 10, 15-year window where, you know, adventure stories and stories involving children trying out crazy stuff that was sort of paramount to a lot of people's growing up, right? You got stories like the Goonies that came
Mm,
out, I
love
think,
that movie.
I don't know, like 10 years prior, right? You got stories like Stand By Me, I think, that
Oh,
which also stars Macaulay Culkin. You got the Little Rascals, right? So like you have these movies that appeal to that childlike adventure
yeah.
that at the time was missing in a lot of Disney movies. Disney movies kind of were focusing on, again, just technological advancements. That I think this is around the time that they were I think Pixar um started producing some of the first. No, this is before
It
Pixar.
was
I think
1 year before Toy Story because
one
Toy
year
Story was in
before Toy
'95.
Story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was around the time that they were starting development on those projects.
Yeah.
And a lot of the elements of storytelling were missing, and
Hmm.
it's strange how you kind of see like this bureaucracy, right?
Hmm.
That takes over different elements of filmmaking, whether it be animation or whatever, where these companies are more focused on trying the new best thing, and they're less focused on doing the best with what they got, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Pagemaster is probably one of the best animated films that came out in the early '90s, and
Yeah.
no one talks about it.
Yeah, it's
It,
pretty remarkable,
it's
and the people involved actually went on to do pretty iconic things. So it was
hmm.
directed by Pixote Hunt and Joe Johnston, and I think I'm saying his name Pixote. But he did so as you mentioned, Fantasia. It was inspired by this. He did
Hmm.
Symphony Number 5 in Fantasia
Hmm.
2000, which was 4 years after the movie came out, and then he was also like a ton of animation department directors for like The Emperor's New Groove and
Mhm.
like Disney movies that we all know. And then Joe Johnston, the other director, did Captain America: The First Avenger, The Rocketeer, Stand by Me. They went on to do great things, and I think this movie is sadly ignored because, as you said, there was a lot of heart in this movie. Whether the movie had to be like 2 hours long or whatever, it didn't have to. As long as like the heart was in it and the story was good, which both of them were. I don't understand why it is lost to the general audience. Not necessarily has to be like getting its own walk of fame, but at least a more recognized understanding would be appreciated for I think this movie because it just feels so fun. It's just fun.
Mhm. It's a fun movie, and I think I know partially why it's a lost film, and it's got to do it's heavily has to do not only with again what I was talking about, this transference of interest in production companies, but I think partially the reason why it sort of failed was because it was surrounding all the stuff that was happening to Macaulay at the time, and
Mm,
I think um, a lot of the distribution and the background noise of the custody battles and everything
mm,
at least played some part
yeah.
in how successful the movie ended up being.
Hmm.
Uh, but at the end of the day, I think what makes this movie kind of stand out as one of those movies that were lost to time is the fact that it as a standalone film, if you were to watch this today, you could sit here and enjoy it with your family.
Yeah.
You could sit here and enjoy it with your kids. You can enjoy it with older folks. It has these elements of nostalgia and wonder that kind of transcend um, most most thematic elements that are present in movies today.
Hmm.
The times have changed, right? We've got great animation movies. We've had so many animated movies that have pulled at my heartstrings and
Hmm.
everything. But maybe it's just me being old. I'm 26, but me being
It's
old. But
it's still. I mean, it's almost a 30-year-old movie. I mean, it's not. I
it's
mean,
a 30-year-old movie.
yeah, it's close.
I watched it on VHS in 2007,
Yeah,
and it came out in '94.
yeah.
So I have a special place in my heart for it. I have this sense of nostalgia for it. It's very ephemeral. It's one of those movies that kind of just um, stands by itself as like a great project in and of itself, but
Yeah.
also as a story, it's wholly unique. You don't
Hmm.
see a lot of that these days. I think the closest we ever came to seeing something like that was again all the references I mentioned. Those elements of Fantasia or Who Framed Roger Rabbit or even some elements of The Wizard of Oz, right?
Hmm.
So there are very few movies as a concept that kind of like kind of hold their own.
Hmm.
And Pagemaster is one of them.
Yeah, Pagemaster, I think, was as someone who only heard this by name and maybe saw like a poster, going into it with no expectation and leaving the movie with a feeling of gratitude because I feel like you earn a lot of the heart in this movie. It isn't kind of just like moved on or like placed in weird moments. You really earn it. Like I said, like he takes the giant jump at the end of the movie and he sleeps in the treehouse at the end of the movie. And he has the books that he kept his promise to them that he'd take them out of the library. So
Mm-hmm.
I think exploring this movie as if you're going in as an animator and looking at it for its animation and kind of going through that history, it's impressive. Macaulay Culkin, who at the time, like we were saying, had a lot of external conflict, and having this movie, as we're talking, be a staple to his early career, and I'm hopefully excited to see where he comes, back into the if he comes back into the world of Hollywood, where he'll do next. But then we have these iconic actors like Patrick Stewart, Whoopi Goldberg, all these other people that made this movie the heart. And like that, there was actually the moment of the movie where you think the books died for
Yeah.
like 20 minutes. You're just gone. And I kind of miss that in older movies where they like just randomly survived. And I did like seeing that. As I also grew up with a little bit of the VHS era. I was born in '02, so in my house we had like VHS of like the Little Mermaid and Snow White and all that. Like the
Mm-hmm.
old VHS, like where you kind of squeeze the box and it has that
Yeah, you gotta
really
squeeze
loud
it and
plastic.
everything. Yeah.
I do kind of miss that feeling of it, but that movie like flushed those memories right back. That's what I feel like this movie does really good in.
It really does. And just talking about one of those elements that you're talking about just now, like I miss it too. I miss those moments in old films where you don't question how,
Yeah, they just did.
right? You don't, they just did.
Yeah,
They just did, and you were happy.
yeah,
You walked out of the theater. I am so glad. I am so happy. Nowadays, everyone's like, that doesn't make any sense. But
yeah,
it was one of those things that older films did that just worked,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And you walked away almost every time. I remember the only time I ever felt anything similar was like when watching like The Sandlot, right? I walked away from watching The Sandlot just thinking like, wow, that was a great story. Not
Mhm.
just a great movie. That was like, I wish I was playing with those kids,
Yeah.
you know? And not many films do that.
No.
The Pagemaster did that for me. And I know, again, just anecdotally as a kid who did nothing but watch movies and read all day, right? I was this big geek. But it was one of those movies that like really kind of, I guess, nurtured my inner child, right?
Yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
even today, like I'm gonna be rewatching it with my fiance and my brother because my fiance has never seen it before.
Oh wow.
And I'm gonna kind of it's like I'm showcasing a piece of my childhood a little bit, right?
Yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
I think it's movies like that that kind of like stand the test of time.
Hmm.
It's just so unfortunate that not a lot of people got to experience that. But one of these days, mark my words, I'm gonna meet Whoopi Goldberg or Sir Patrick Stewart or Macaulay Culkin, and after doing this to my face at him and annoying the hell out of him, I'm gonna ask them about how it was working on this movie.
Oh
And
yeah.
I bet you, because I've seen it before, they probably have either forgotten
Mm.
or it's one of those cherished memories that they have never forgotten. They're always begging for someone to ask them about.
That's a really
And I
good
can't
point.
wait for that moment.
Yeah,
I
I
can't wait for
I
that moment.
really hope it does work out for you because, as you were saying, they probably had a lot of fun. I mean, I know Whoopi and Patrick, they did their lines together, and I think having them kind of like look back on that, I think it'd be interesting to see. I want to see if that ever happens. I hope it does. Please,
Mhm.
just just bring the VHS. We gotta find it somewhere,
I'm gonna
sign
find it.
it. We gotta get this thing in like what the Natural History Museum or something like where it has like John McClane's tank top or something. We gotta get this
Yeah,
movie going.
I forgot. I think it's the National Library or
Yeah,
something like that. They take things and they put it in for
yeah,
the perpetual archive or whatever.
yes,
This is one of those movies that should be in there.
yeah, absolutely.
It's so 90s.
Yeah, like if Shrek can
It
get
is
involved in
so
this,
90s, dude.
yeah, if Shrek's added to the National Registry, this can
Hmm.
add 100%. I mean, I know it's no Shrek,
100%.
but it's second place in my opinion.
Oh no, it's a perfect film.
Yeah,
Honestly, and for any of your listeners or anything, if you haven't seen
go.
the Pagemaster, please. I'm not sure where it's streaming
I had to
right
rent it on
now.
Prime. That's where I
You have to
saw it.
rent it on Prime.
It was
Rent
like
it on
three
Prime.
bucks.
It's $3 is nothing for an hour and a half, 2 hours worth of animated entertainment,
Yeah.
and it's definitely something that again stands the test of time that I think kids would love, that I think your family would love,
Hmm.
and it's a little piece of unknown history
Mm.
that I am glad I was at least a part of in some manner.
Yeah,
So
man.
please check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Go check it out. And if there's anything you want to add to it, we're about to wrap it up here. I mean, thanks for this great addition to the registry that we have that is Cinema Showcase. Dogma, we'll definitely work up to that one.
Oh yeah, we'll work up to
That's
Dogma.
that's
That's a whole thing.
that is a that's not enough. We don't have enough days to go over that movie.
Dogma is like a multi-podcast movie.
That's
There's so
part
much.
five of many. Dogma's crazy, man. I remember just reading
Oh
about a
man.
Dogma like a few months back, or a few years back for a film class I took in college. And I was like, what was the purpose of this movie?
Yeah,
It's just
viewers correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure Dogma is Kevin Smith's favorite movie. It's
Oh,
one
it
of his favorites.
100% is. It 100% is.
It got lost to bureaucracy, and it got lost to distribution, and it got lost to copyrights, and there was so much issues with it that it
Oh
just
yeah.
never saw the light of day after a while. So
No, I think it was in theaters for what was it, like 2, 3 weeks or something?
it was 3 weeks, and you can't find many digital copies these days.
No.
I remember having to torrent it back in 2012 just to see it because I was going down a Kevin Smith rabbit hole, and it was so hard to find. But nowadays, I think Prime might have it, or if it's still in distribution or copyright limbo, you will be able to find it somewhere.
I think it's
Definitely,
actually, I think it's on Prime.
it might be on Prime.
Because I know I looked it up and trying to see where I can find it. Oh, you can buy it.
You
I
can
think
buy
on
it,
Prime.
but you can't rent.
Oh, sorry,
You
that's
can't
actually
rent
sorry, that's
it.
a TV series. Never mind. I don't know where.
Oh, that's Dogma TV still. That's interesting.
I think it's a different Dogma. It's with I think
Mhm.
it's with yeah, it does not look like it was made by Kevin Smith. It looks
No.
professional. But I think it is it's an interesting one we'll definitely go back to. Chris, thank you so much for joining. You guys can check out Chris
Thank
and all the
you.
all the stuff in the description. Ed with Ego, hopefully still on TikTok when this is released if it's
Oh, I hope so too. We'll know by the end of today.
yeah, well, yeah, it'll be EOD, but definitely on YouTube. Check him on Instagram. Check out past episodes of Cinema Showcase on this channel. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks again, Chris. We'll have you soon on the Tuvi podcast for our Oscars episode. So excited for that one. That is our Super Bowl.
That's gonna be fun. That's
Yeah.
gonna be fun.
It's going to be so much fun. Thanks again, man, and we will see you guys
Thank you for having
next
me.
time.
See you next time.